Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Water Wednesday. So if this is the first time you come to Water Wednesday, just let you know, Water Wednesday, it's a water awareness program. So we usually do different topics related to water, such as water in urban landscape, water as a drinking water source, water as a critical component in our ecosystem. So we host our webinar on Zoom and also broadcast on Facebook to reach to a broader audience. And for today's Water Wednesday, I have a special guest from Lake County, Brooke Moffis. She's the Lake County Horticulture Agent. What she will discuss with us is about native plants. And to be more specific, it's a native plants and water conservation strategies. So now let's welcome Brooke.
Hi, thank you, Lynn, and thank you everyone for being here today. And I always look forward to the Water Wednesdays. It's a fun event. So today I'm going to be talking to you about native plants and water conservation strategies. So I do work as an extension agent in Lake County, and I am also an urban ecology student with the University of Florida. We have a small urban ecology lab, and I'm very curious to know ways that we can attract beneficial wildlife like butterflies and pollinators and beetles and insects. And I also am looking at ways that we can help conserve water in the landscape. So this is what we'll be talking about for about the next 45 minutes. I'll tell you about our situation in Florida, which so many of you are aware of. We'll talk about why native plants, some of the strategies that I've been working on, one that will relate to growing wildflowers and mixed species lawns. The other one will be looking at the health of native plants as an ornamental in the landscape. And then I'll get into just some brief recommendations. So here's the situation that Florida is facing. And I think you all know this. I saw that most of the residents were from Central Florida, and we are just expanding so fast. We have about 900 residents that move to Florida every single day. And about a year or so ago, it was closer to 1,100 residents that moved to Florida every day. And residential landscapes are the most rapidly expanding land use in the United States. And with that, we get these homogeneous and highly maintained landscapes. So I want you all to kind of check out this picture here. And how many plant species do you see in this photo? I know it's really hard to tell because it's probably really small on your screen, but if you were to guess, how many would you say? And I know your chat's disabled, so what most people say when I ask this question is they'll say, I see 7 species or 9 species, or sometimes I'll get a 12. Well, I can make out, that we have a zoysia turfgrass probably there. Looks like we have some type of juniper ground cover. We have some boxwoods around the pickleball court. We have a sable palm. We've got some date palms in there, some live oaks. I'm sure there's other things as well, but my point is that's probably about it. We're just not very diverse in a lot of our commercial landscapes. Our residential homes, we can get diversity, but they can also be pretty homogeneous as well. So when you have a highly maintained landscape like this, you can have increased water demands, and we are about to our limit of we can't do any more additional withdrawals to the groundwater aquifer once we hit 850 million gallons of water per day of our withdrawal. So we'll still be able to withdraw, but we won't be able to keep adding and keep adding and keep adding to that without seeing some negative consequences. Another thing that happens with this type of land use, we've got the water usage to maintain these things, and then we also have habitat loss. I mean, you've all seen it going around Central Florida, where we have these massive subdivisions that are being developed, and with that, we are displacing wildlife. So I see this as an opportunity, though. All right, so why do I care about this? Well, I am a Lake County resident, and this is a trend that is probably happening in a lot of your counties as well. On the left, this is our current growth. This is our baseline for Lake County. In the middle, this is what we're going to look like in 2070 if we keep our current trend of development. And on the far right, you'll see that it's still highly developed, but there's a little bit more green space in there. So if we can develop about 20% denser, so make our housing lots even denser and protect our unprotected ag land, the 2070 is the best case scenario. And so many counties are probably like this here in the Central Florida area, but this is my home county and where I work and play. So again, we have this insane population growth, or I shouldn't say insane, just very rapid population growth. And so again, stress on the water resources, stress on wildlife habitat. And why do I think native plants are a possible solution, or one of the possible solutions for our landscapes? Well, they're adapted to Florida's climate, but you still have to plant the right plant in the right place. So if you have a native plant that's adapted to wet feet, it needs like a hydric soil that holds a lot of moisture, it's not going to perform well in well-drained sandy soils. So you still have to plant the right plant in the right place, even with the native, but they are adapted to Florida's climate. They provide a sense of place. I think natives can help us differentiate our neighborhoods in our areas of Central Florida, and that we can look like that neighborhood is part of the natural ecosystem if we design it well. And I kind of relate this to where if you drive around any of the commercial developments, we all have the same grocery stores, we have the same retail centers. And when you drive around to our these commercial areas in the United States, they all look the same. You can't tell Dallas, Texas from Orlando, Florida, in a lot of our cities, if you catch my drift. So I think native plants can help us differentiate and make these cities special. So that's what I mean by providing a sense of place. They are crucial to native animal biodiversity. So if we want to have wildlife, we have to have native plants. So the native plants are going to support insects, and they are going to support other wildlife feeding on it. So seeds and flower for nectar. So you have to have the native plants as a building block to build that ecosystem and that food web. So native plants are absolutely critical to the food web if we want to keep our native animals around. And by animals, I'm the big animals, the big picture, insects, birds, deer. Oh, what else do we have in our areas? Coyotes. I don't know if too many people want to keep coyotes around, but anyway, there's lots of wildlife that depends on native plants. All right, so what I thought I would do now is just talk to you about a couple strategies. One is native plants and lawns, and this is a really different study here, so I'll get into it. Our objectives of this study was to look at plant diversity and to see how, if we increase plant diversity, will it improve the resiliency of the lawn? So you can almost think of that as like drought tolerance, its ability to withstand change. We wanted to see if we added more plants, if we could increase the arthropods. And by arthropods, we looked at pollinators, natural enemies, herbivores, and ground-dwelling insects as well. But we also knew that this is very different. So we need to understand if homeowners will even accept this style of landscaping. And then we wanted to look at the feasibility. Is this even doable? Can we maintain these things? How do we maintain these things? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to present these two studies to you, the multi-species lawns being one, and then native plants and urban soils being the other. And then at the end of each study, I'm going to talk to you about plants that I think could be good recommendations. So back to this study, though, what we did is we did 3 treatments. We had a treatment that was Bahia grass alone, which is a very common turf grass. It's very drought tolerant. We have Bahia grass mixed with 4 forbs, and you may not know the term forbs. Forb is, you could think of it for this presentation as a wildflower, but it's just an herbaceous, a soft, succulent flowering plant, if you will. So forb, think of it as a wildflower. And then our third treatment was just the wildflowers. All these plots received the same watering, which was only 4 times in 2 years after we established them. And then they all received the same amount of weeding. We had no fertilizers or pesticides with this 2-year study. But we did have some mowing differences with the plots. So the Bahia grass alone, we mowed them about once a week. And the mixture we mowed every 2 weeks. And then the wildflowers we only mowed as needed. So we're trying to still kind of maintain these things, but we're trying to figure out the best way to deal with these different systems. So the flowers that we picked are Phyllonotiflora, which is frog fruit. You see that in the top left. Then we have Bahia grass, which actually that's not a forb, that's a grass. Another reason we picked Bahia grass, I mentioned the drought tolerance, but we also picked it because it has an open habit. So we thought the wildflowers would reseed easily in it. And then we did lyre-leaf sage, which you see in the second picture with the dark purple leaves. Then we did mimosa, sunshine mimosa, with that little cute powder puff flower. And then we did Leavenworth tick seed, which is the bright yellow flower. So we tried to vary the species color, and we tried to vary the structure of the plant as well. And what we found in the study, I'm just recapping because I have a lot to cover with you in a short amount of time, but what we found in this study, when we looked at what we said resiliency, so we looked and we measured that by looking at the green coverage in the plot. So we said something was basically more resilient if it had a higher percentage of green coverage. I think when people are viewing lawns and landscapes, that's what they're looking for typically, is they want green coverage. So you can see that we have our Bahia grass only plots in the left here. We have them in winter and in summer. We have the forb, which were the wildflower only plots in the summer and in the winter. Those are the two pictures in the middle stacked on top of each other. And then we have the forb and the Bahia grass mixed. And that is on the last two pictures on the right. So you can see it in the top during the summer and the bottom during the winter. So what we found when we wanted to see how much green coverage we had, or resiliency, is that the plots with flowers, with the wildflowers, had a higher green coverage in the spring and in the summer, but the turf grass provided more coverage in the winter months. And then we also found throughout the study that when we had the mixture, the one that you see in the top middle with the forb and the, the one that you see in the top right with the forb and the Bahia mix, that offered the most consistent green coverage throughout the study as well. So there really was something between this mixture of turf grass and the wildflowers that helped this turf grass keep a nice green coverage even when we were droughty. But there's some issues with this. This is what a lot of the plots looked like in the winter. And this is the time of year when a lot of residents are in Florida. It's when, all of our seasonal residents are down here. And I don't know if most of the public would be able to tolerate this type of look in the winter months. So something to keep in mind. We learned a lot from this study, actually. So I'm going to give you some more of the results, not in high detail, but I'm just going to gloss over them quickly with you. What we found in the plots is we looked at our pollinators. We found that, as you would expect, the plots that had the wildflowers had increased pollinator diversity and increased pollinator visits. And then when we looked at our other insects and arthropods, we had a greater abundance of herbivores, and those are insects that eat plants. And you might be wondering, why in the world would we want insects that eat plants in our plots? Well, we actually do, because we want that plant to help support that insect and to then help support the food web. So this was very different for me. I'm trained as an ornamental horticulturalist. And now that I'm more in an ecology realm, or at least I'm dipping my toe into the ecology realm, I'm seeing plants as food resources too. So it's okay to have a little chewing if it helps support life. All right. We also saw that natural enemies in plots. We saw a higher amount of natural enemies as well. Interesting, though, we did not see any differences in those insects and arthropods that live along the ground. So even if it was Bahia grass, or if it was mixed with wildflowers or wildflowers alone, we didn't see a difference in their populations. All right. And so again, I just mentioned this, but plots with the wildflowers had a higher green coverage in the spring and summer. Turf grass provided more coverage in the winter. And then we also looked at homeowner perception. I actually still have more data to analyze, so this number could definitely change. This is not a final number here, but we found that about 30% of the residents that viewed the plots were somewhat likely to extremely likely to use Bahia grass mixed with forbs. But I will mention, I do believe there is some bias there. The people that we surveyed were people that come to our gardens and they come to our classes here at the extension office. So we looked at a small pool of the population, but the people that we surveyed were typically already gardeners in Central Florida. They were, some of them were actually pest control professionals. And then we also surveyed Florida Nursery Grower and Landscape Association members as well. And then we even looked at some landscape designers too. So we did survey quite a few people, but they were all gardeners for the most part, or at least involved in the green industry. So moving forward, we have to figure out this winter dormancy. Maybe there's some great native plants that we can grow in the winter to kind of help keep this nice green color. We also want to look at irrigation needs for these plots. We decided we were just going to irrigate them for survival, but I did find that it was very promising that after we established these plots, this turf grass and this blend of wildflowers and this wildflower plot, we only needed to irrigate 4 times in 2 years. So talk about water savings there. But I will also say that Bahia grass alone can survive without irrigation. So we need to keep that in mind too. So anyhow, some things that were, something that we need to overcome is we need better weed suppression, because the weeds could get really competitive, and they were very competitive very early. So there might be some different things we could do moving forward with experiments like this to see if we could do a better job of controlling weeds. So we want to think about more low growing and flowering plants that could be mixed as a native plant wildflower sod. And so anyhow, we need to analyze more perception too. I was telling you that I don't have all my data analyzed for that yet, but there has been some commercial interest in what we are doing. Some of you, if you're a native plant enthusiast, may know about Green Owl Gardens. They are actually looking at producing a wildflower sod, which you see in this picture here. So this was from a Facebook post that they posted a little while ago, and they're doing this wildflower sod mixture. So we'll see how that goes. There have also been some very large growers in Lake County as well that have grown more traditionally ornamental type plants, and they are now curious about growing some type of wildflower sod as well, or at least ground covers, and getting those in their product mix. So there has been some commercial interest locally. So now what I thought I would do is just, briefly mention the study there as a potential water savings, and something that can attract pollinators and other insects as well. But let's just look at some native plants that could possibly serve as lawns. And so first I want to direct you to, what do we think of, or what do we want out of our lawns? Well, we want uniform green coverage. We want to be able to recreate on them. So we want to be able to kick the soccer with our kids, or just let our kids run around. We need, one of the nice things about them is for erosion control as well. They can be very, very good for erosion control because they have such a fibrous root system. Lawns are very good at filtering out nutrients as well and other pollutants because of that extensive root system. We want things that we can mow. We also want plants that are tolerant to foot traffic. And then ideally we want low water usage, low fertilizer input, and low pesticides, if any. I mean, really, I think we have more and more pressure to limit the amount of inputs that we do on our lawns. And a lot of that's for protection of our water resources. So I want to tell you about a tale of 2 lawns. This is from my backyard and my front yard. I have a beautiful St. Augustine grass in the backyard. It is probably from the 70s. That's when the house was built. So I just kind of assume it's from the 70s. It was pre me living there anyhow. So I think it's a St. Augustine that likes it a little tall and it can take some shade. Plus we have a retention pond in the backyard. Well, I do not fertilize this. I do not water it. I do not apply pesticides to it. Actually, about 10 years ago, I think we did treat it for chinch bugs, but I think a pesticide treatment once in 10 years for chinch bugs is, that's fine. But we just mow it. We mow it weekly or every other week, and then, we take the winters off from mowing. So it does quite well. But I think we have the right plant in the right place. In the front yard, however, we have a totally different story. I have extremely dry sandy soil, and I have full sun beating down on the front yard pretty much all day long. And I had a situation where my irrigation went I lost an oak tree, and my neighbor, who was thinking he was doing me a favor, accidentally scalped my lawn, or maybe he was purposely trying to scalp my lawn. I don't know. But anyway, he was just trying to mow it for us. And so anyhow, what happened was that the St. Augustine grass that we had in the front lawn just bit the dust with all of these situations happening. So I said, let's not irrigate, and let's see what else we can do. So what we did is we planted Sunshine Mimosa, Mimosa strigilosa, in the front yard. And I think overall I've been pretty happy with this plant. It's definitely thrives when we're really, really droughty, but it can get weedy in the summertime when we're getting a lot of rain. But I'll talk a little bit more about mimosa. But I think this is just to stress, hey, let's plant the right plant in the right place and get that figured out. And then we can have very low maintenance lawns. All right, so these are some potential lawns, and I think you all might be interested in this if you are a native plant enthusiast. This is twin flower, and it can offer some really nice thick coverage. I've been really impressed with this plant. It has little purple flowers on it, full sun to part shade. It can take dry to moist soils, and it can be very drought tolerant once you establish it. But this plant is, I would say it's about 6 to 12 inches tall, and I would not consider it mowable. Although the jury's still out, there really hasn't been any studies on whether this thing is mowable or not. And we've never really had to mow it at our Discovery Gardens. I also don't think, because it has woody stems, I don't think it's very walkable because we keep it at a higher height. But it still could be a good wildflower lawn in areas where we're not walking. So I wanted to show you this because as I started getting into these wildflowers, I started doing a little bit of research, and I was seeing that a lot of the research on wildflowers has been or has occurred in the past in restoration situations. So I'll just read a couple of titles to you really quick. One is Plant Response Following Soil Disturbance in a Longleaf Pine Ecosystem. Ground cover recovery patterns and life history traits, implications for restoration obstacles and opportunities in a species-rich savanna. So I couldn't find anything about growing these plants in an urban landscape, or very little as far as scientific studies go. So this is all kind of new area. Swamp twin flower, this is if you have a moist site. It could take full sun to part sun. And again, it's going to do best in moist areas. I think the areas in between homes that sometimes has a swell or a dip to it, this would probably do really well in those areas. It is a larval plant for the common buckeye. Frog fruit is another native that could make a really nice lawn as well. It can take moist to moderately dry soil, full sun to part shade, and it is an adult and a larval butterfly plant for the Phelan crescent, the common buckeye, and the white peacock. Just to show you a picture of frog fruit grown in sort of a lawn application. This is a home where they went with all native plants, and this is in the Villages. And so they were able to approach their HOA and their architectural review committee with a nice design and get this passed. And so I think so much of it is communicating to your HOA and showing them a nice design, telling them how you're going to manage it to where it doesn't look messy, I think can go a long way. So, but they have frog fruit in the front here. And so that acts as some green coverage. So this section of the Villages said, hey, it's okay to put in a ground cover, but we want green coverage up near the street so that there's like a consistent green coverage when you look across the neighborhood. So, and I think that's a good idea to maintain like a visual consistency. So this is Sunshine Mimosa. This is full sun to part shade. Is it mowable? Yes, but it's not necessary. You can't, if you keep it short, you can walk across it. You can play sports on it to an extent. I mean, when I say sports, that's kicking the soccer around or playing volleyball with my kids in it. It's nothing more than that. I would not recommend it for a sports field, that's for sure. But it offers seasonal coverage, so it will die out in the winter time, but it will come right back when we're dry. And it can get some competition from weeds in the summer. So it is an aggressive native. So I like to tell folks, if you plant it and you don't have it contained somehow with some type of border or barrier, it will creep into your native your neighbor's yards if conditions are right. So I actually have a Mimosa Bahia blend in the front yard. So this is actually the one on the left is a snapshot of the Bahia Mimosa. The picture on the right is where the mimosa is creeping into a really, really dry soil with some Bahia grass. And so I just wanted to take a picture of it actually creeping into the dry areas. So again, I maintain it relatively short so that it does look like a lawn. Here's another one that is interesting, although for me, the verdict is still out. This is Southern River Sage. You can grow a nice stand of it, but I would say it's more of like a ground cover than a lawn. I have not seen that it is mowable. We actually tried to mow it to try to stimulate some more growth, and it did not recover well. So I would say this is probably not mowable. It is aggressive, but it can fill in an area, and it does have these little cute purple flowers. So now I'm going to switch gears on you, and we're going to talk about ornamental native plants. So some of those larger native plants, and I'll tell you about some of the research we're doing with urban soils. So I need to set the stage for you first. This is what a typical soil profile looks like. And you may have experienced something similar if you have been driving across roads in any mountainous region where they have the cuts in the roads, and you can see the side of an embankment, or the side there where they've done the cut. So sometimes you can even see the bedrock. Sometimes you can see the subsoil just below that, and you can see these different layers to the soil. Well, what I want to stress to you with this is that the O horizon of the soil is that is where we have, you could consider that topsoil, but it's where we have a lot of organic matter. So that's where we have a lot of dead grass blades, or maybe some dead plant material, maybe dead and decomposing animal remains. And that mixes with the A horizon, which is more of our soil minerals. And so that's what develops topsoil. And that's what can be so nice for our plants to grow in. It can offer them nutrients and sometimes be able to hold the water too, depending on what our soils are made of. And then we start getting into the subsoil once we get below that. And that's typically not an area where a lot of plant roots are growing. And this is in a natural soil. But this is what happens during the development process. The very first thing that we do is we go in and we remove all the vegetation for the most part, and we put it into these big burn piles. And then we grade the land and we prepare it for building, and we take heavy equipment and we drive it across it, and then we take and we build up, grade to the land so that we get the proper water flow. So all these things are happening. Well, what happens is we get these very disturbed and these very compacted soils. So that diagram that we just saw with the soil profile, you no longer are growing in topsoil. You are growing in subsoil typically, and it has been moved around on the site. And sometimes it's placed over the topsoil, or sometimes that topsoil is moved off site and moved to another section. So, it's really variable, the type of soil that you get when you move into a newer development. The picture in the bottom right is just to show you that when we drive this heavy equipment across and we're grading the topsoil, we can get these compacted soils. And this is irrigation that is actually just not even going into the soil. It's just kind of wetting things and then moving off into the street. So that can happen in these types of situations. And so this is the time, the land is graded, the house is built, the sod is laid down, and you get your token tree and your shrubs around the front. And this is what people are now trying to garden with, whether it be the HOA that does the landscaping, or you as an individual, or you hire someone. This is now what we're trying to deal with. And so these are just more pictures of urban soil. This is a picture I took just walking around a neighborhood right next to me. The other picture is actually where I have my native plant research plots. And at first I was very upset when I saw this, because I'm like, oh no, I have all this heavy equipment parked right where my research is going. But then I thought, wait a minute, this is ideal, because this is kind of the worst case scenario for me to try all these plants. So again, soil compaction, your soils are made up of pore space, And your pore space can either hold water or it can hold air. And then it's made up of mineral space, or I shouldn't say mineral space, but it's made up of minerals. So then when we compact the soil, we squish out all the pore space that can hold the water and the air. So anyhow, that's what we mean by compacted soil there. So the experiment that I'm going to talk to you about briefly is actually happening in Osceola County, and it's very close to the Orange County line, and it is in a community called Sunbridge. So what I'm showing you here is the Sunbridge Base Camp. And the bright green area that you see in the middle, this is where their sales office is. They have a pavilion. They have some yurts there, which are part of their sales office, which I think are pretty cool, actually. And then they have some nature trails that go into the surrounding natural areas from this event area, if you will. And then the picture, or the section of the picture that has the yellow arrows pointed to it, that's where our experiment is going in. So this developer came to us and said, hey, I really want to have these landscapes that reduce water use. And we want to be able to do something different. We want to attract birds and we want to attract pollinators. And so we want there to be like a sustainability theme to this development. So we said, okay, let's go in and we'll do an experiment on site, and it will probably be highly valuable because it's, in a typical, it's not in a research place somewhere else. It's on site where development is actually occurring. And so we also wanted to turn it into a nice landscape feature too. So these were some of the things that we were thinking, or the goals of the project, still are the goals of the project. We want to reduce water needs. We want to support biodiversity of pollinators and other wildlife. We want to see if we can change those urban soils so that we can improve plant health. And we want this to be a walkable garden feature too. And I'm actually going to skip through a few things here, but anyhow, these are our treatments. We said we were going to water half of the plots. These are actual research plots. We were going to water half of the research plots once a week. And the others we were only going to do as needed. And that's when we saw signs of plant wilting. Then half of the plots received compost, and the other half of the plots did not receive compost. So it was just the plain urban soil, but all of the plots were tilled. So what we know about agricultural research, and this is a general statement here, but with increasing rates of compost, we see that the density of the soil decreases, which is a good thing. We see that roots can actually penetrate the soil easier, which is a good thing. We have more porosity, so we have, greater pore space or more pores, and that water can really infiltrate into the soil. And then if the compost is composted properly, and it has the right, what we call carbon nitrogen ratio, which could be a whole class on just composting, we can actually supply nutrients to the plants as well. So we looked at 26 different species of native plants. We picked some tried and true that you will find out there in the industry very easily, like Yopon holly. We picked firebush. We have Gulf muley grass, but we also picked things like St. Johns Wort and Starry Rosinweed and button rattlesnake master. So we have a wide diversity of trees, shrubs, and then wildflowers. So let me show you just some pictures of what we're seeing. Again, one of the main goals is to reduce water use and support biodiversity, or I would say our main goals for the project. So these plots have been here for about a year and 3 months when I took the pictures here. This is March of 23. And I'm going to show you the worst case scenario and then the best case scenario. So on the left is the worst case scenario for plant health. We have as needed irrigation, so it only comes on if we see signs of plant wilting, without compost. So this is just the urban soil. The best case scenario is on the right. It is weekly irrigation, so they're getting hit every single week, and it has compost. Again, this is in March. These are the same plots in July. Again, the worst case scenario, we have as needed irrigation without compost, and then we have weekly irrigation with compost. So here's where it starts to get interesting. And that is when we start to compare the plots that have weekly irrigation without compost and as needed irrigation with compost. So again, weekly irrigation, that's going to happen once a week. And this is the one on the left is just on the urban soil. There's no compost. The one on the right is as needed. So we're only irrigating when we see signs of wilting, and then that has the compost. What I think is really interesting, and you can see it in this photo, is that the as needed irrigation with compost is actually performing better visually than the one without compost that's getting irrigated every single week. And you can see the same trends. This was just a few months later in July. You can see the same kind of trends going on here. So let's see. So again, we have weekly irrigation without compost, and then as needed irrigation with compost on the right. And you see that there's more green, bigger plant growth, bigger plant height here. All right, so this is what we found when we started going through and looking at the gallons. We actually had a water meter on here so we could know exactly what we were watering. So the as needed irrigation, we watered 12,208 gallons. And this was all of our plots that got as needed irrigation. So this was 8 plots. Once a week irrigation, we used 56,760 gallons. And that again was the 8 plots. So this ended up being about an 82% water savings. So, and, we have watered in times of drought, but really it was all at one time period in March when the soils were just got really, really hydrophobic. So that's a pretty big water savings. All right, now let's look at the top performing plants in the study so far. And I still have more data to collect, so we'll see if there's any others that kind of break into this top performing plants as I start to kind of analyze things. But these are just ones that I have visually noticed or observed that really performed nicely, no matter if they were on compost or no compost soils, or if they were getting as needed or regular irrigation. So Gulf muhlygrass, you're probably all familiar with this, especially if you're a native plant person. A lot of the municipalities plant it because of its beautiful fall color, and it's very, very tough plant. It is tolerant to a wide range of soil conditions. It blooms in the fall, it can take full sun, again, very drought tolerant. And that's the grass with the purple plumes, just in case you don't know Gulf muhlygrass. Elliots lovegrass was another star performer. This is the grass that's backlit by the light, so it has almost like this white bloom. And then when it's not in bloom, it kind of has a little bit of a rust color to the leaves, just a slight rust color. And this is a bunch grass that blooms in the fall. The birds will use the small seeds, and there is actually a skipper butterfly that will feed on the leaves. So this can take it moist to dry, really well-drained sands. But I would say with this plant, we did see a pretty big difference between the compost and the no compost treatment, but even the no compost treatment, they looked pretty good. And then the Starry Rosinweed, this was another nice performer. This one flowers throughout the year. It will get hit by a frost or freeze, but it will come back. It'll take dry to moist soil. It can reach 3 feet to 12 feet tall. I normally see it around the 4-foot range, but I had someone just tell me that they had some that was about 6 foot tall. So anyhow, so it can get quite large on you. I've never seen one 12 feet, but I'm not going to say it doesn't happen because the literature says it can get that big. But this plant performed beautifully in all of the plots, no matter the compost or the irrigation treatment, but they did perform a little bit better with the compost. Dotted horsemint, this is another one that I love because it attracts the pollinators so intensely. I mean, there's so many pollinators. It'll take really dry soils, and it has this really pretty purple to white bloom on it. And actually the part that's so showy is actually more of a bract, so it's like a leaf than an actual bloom. But anyhow, just we'll call it a bloom for the sake of this, but it can be really nice and great for attracting pollinators. This I thought was a cool combination. This is the dotted horsemint with the Elliots lovegrass, and this was in the fall, and I just thought it was quite pretty together. So, we're using this experiment not just to see how these plants perform in the compost and in different irrigation regimes, but we're also just seeing which native plants will actually make it, period. So we've learned a lot. There's a cardinal flower that just died out. It bloomed and then it died, and it hasn't been back since. So that one I would not recommend in at least these types of urban soils. Also, I want to draw your attention to the size of the Elliots love grass that you see, this clump of 3 on the right. That is a compost treatment. And then right next to it on the left is the same Elliots love grass, and this is without compost. So you can see a big range in the growth there. Another plant that performed quite well was St. Johns Wort. This one was the Atlantic St. Johns Wort. Really, really like this plant. Even when it's not in bloom, it just has like this really nice compact green foliage. It's very drought tolerant. It can take a lot of full sun, sandy soils for sure. And it performed beautifully in all the treatments. It did perform a little bit better when we had some compost, but at the same time, even the non-compost treatments, it looked really, really well. So another great recommendation. So just some other recommendations moving forward, and then maybe we can open it up for questions in the Q&A. These are just some compost or fertilization questions. You know, what we did here is we incorporated compost into the top 4 inches of the soil, and we tilled it in before planting. There's a lot we don't know on the compost effects long term. So we don't know if we're seeing that there's better visual quality, or, you know, just a better look to the plants when we have the compost than if we don't have the compost. But that's also not all the plants. Some plants are performing quite well without the compost too. So a lot of the recommendations, at least from ag studies or landscape studies, have said to incorporate about 1/3 compost for 2/3 of the volume of the rest of your soil. That's a whole lot of compost. So again, we did the 4 inches and tilled it in. We also don't know if if the compost is going to leach nitrogen or phosphorus, because you are putting out a fertilizer in essence too. You know, of course, it's a different thing than the synthetic fertilizers, but it could still pollute if we had a torrential downpour after we applied a big layer of compost. So we don't know. We need to study this more, but we're just getting started. So you got to start somewhere. Other recommendations I would have for you is determine your goals. Do you want a drought tolerant landscape? Is that your number 1 priority? Because that might alter your plant choices. Do you want to attract wildlife? Do you want to try to do them both together? Do you want a very maintained look versus a natural look? I think for a lot of these native plants, since they are natural, they tend to lend themselves towards a naturalistic look, which could change the way you maintain your landscape. Another recommendation, I give this for everybody, no matter if you're growing turf grass or if you're growing ornamental plants or if you're growing native plants or whatever it might be, get a soil test done. We now have this kit called the Soil Test Kit, and it's so easy. It's soilkit.com/Florida, and it's very easy to use. You can order it online. They send it to your house, and you just send it right back. And the shipping is paid for when you buy the kit to begin with. So very, very nice kit to use. So know where your soil is and know whether or not you need to add compost to it. If you want to work with poor soil, you might can find some native plants or other plants out there that will fit the bill and will perform nicely in that poor soil. So it just all depends. It's still right plant in the right place. So I wanted to end with a little plug for the Outside Collaborative. We have a conference coming up in October. And, you know, if you're thinking these studies are really cool, you can hear more about them at this. We are going to tour around our landscape. So that experiment that you saw with the winding path that we also mimicked a garden, you can tour around that at the Outside Collaborative as well. So the Outside Collaborative is a group of, there's some developers involved, there's some builders involved, there are University of Florida professors, there are UCF professors, there are students and extension agents, and there's just some homeowners that attend it. The conference I thought was excellent last year. So I'd like to give it a nice plug. You know, if you just put in outsidecollab.com, you'll pull it up. And they have lots of videos from last year that are free for you to watch on their website, which I think was really nice and educational. And then here's my contact info as well. So with that, Elin, I will turn it back over to you, and maybe we can take some of those questions.
Thank you, Brooke. I know we don't want to compact soil, but last 45 minutes, definitely compact with all the information.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was a lot. I feel like you all were drinking from a fire hose. I feel like I was delivering from a fire hose. So
Oh, it's great. So we can see all the perspectives. That's awesome. Before I forgot. That's why I launched a poll for now. So, because I know some folks, some people might be still typing the questions. So while people are still typing the questions, or you already finished your questions, you can take this poll here. And I will start from a question I collected from the Facebook page. It's just really, I think it's going back to the question you did the survey about 30%, likely will use Bahia mix. So what's their least favorite?
Oh, the least favorite. I'm wanting to say from, oh gosh, you would ask me this. From my recollection, it was the wildflowers alone, because I think there were too many holes, possibly there wasn't this consistent green coverage in the wildflowers alone. That is my guess as to why, it wasn't popular. So, and I will tell you, the Bahia grass alone was the most popular. So I do need to state that the Bahia grass alone was the most popular. So I'm wanting to say around 50% said that they would plant Bahia grass in their front yard or their side yards. We did find that people were a little bit more prone to say that they would be willing to adopt the Bahia grass mixed with the wildflowers in their backyards than their front yards, which makes sense, right? So, but, and I have to say that's really preliminary. I still have more surveys that I need to input and still run. So we could see that 30% decrease, or we could see an increase. I'm not sure yet. So, but that's just what we're finding from the initial surveys that we've analyzed.
And for your initial survey, how many people took the survey?
I think initially, oh goodness, you guys are, I need to get all my surveys. I'm wanting to say it was around 50, 60 initially with the ones that I've actually been able to analyze, but I probably have almost a third more to input. So that's why I'm really trying to caution saying this is just preliminary, because that number could go down, it could go up. So.
Great. So I see we already got some people taking the poll survey. So I will still leave the poll open while we'll take some questions from the chat box. So the first question is from Wendy, ask, is hibiscus a native plant?
Oh, I'm sorry, which one?
Hibiscus.
Oh, no, it's not. Although there is a native hibiscus, which is a scarlet hibiscus that grows in like a swamp-like habit. And if you like to kayak and canoe, sometimes you can see it like in our rivers and our spring runs, but it needs to be in water. So that's the only, there might be others. I think there might be another really small hibiscus that's native. But yeah, most of the hibiscus that you have probably in your landscapes and that you find at the big retail garden centers, they're non-native. And I do want to stress, it doesn't mean that they're bad. I have hibiscus in my own lawn. I actually have a pretty good mix of natives and ornamentals in my home lawn. So hibiscus, just because it's not native doesn't mean it's not a good Florida friendly plant. It's just I think with me, and the reason why I'm interested in native plants is because I really see that the way they can support wildlife. But you can still have, you can still grow some of these other ornamental plants for sure.
Great.
And some of them are very drought tolerant too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a chased vitex tree, and I have to tell you all, I thought it was native, but that's okay. I planted it in my yard, and someone said, that's not a native. I was like, oh, that's okay. It's still beautiful. And it attracts the pollinators like crazy, and it can take dry, sandy soils too. So to me, that's a win.
It's just going back to the right plant in the right place.
For sure.
Another question is about your composting material. What type of compost did you use?
Okay, sure. So the compost for the experiment is, the product name is Command, and it is a horse manure is the base. So I'm not sure what else all they put into that, but horse manure and horse bedding is the base of that product. Now that's the company that has worked with us for some of these research projects. there are other composts that work really well too. So even yard waste that has been composted down can make a really nice compost. So even the stuff that you can get from like the landfill, if it is composted correctly, it can still be a really good compost. So there's a lot of options for compost out there.
They are trying to find out, because I know there is certification for composting materials. I forgot the name of that.
Let me see. I might actually be able to pull that up quickly for you.
Yeah, that's I went to a workshop the other day. It was telling the composting material, you want to choose something, it's a mature.
Yes, you definitely want a mature compost. If you put it down too hot, it can actually have negative effects. And if it has too much carbon compared to nitrogen in it, it can actually pull nutrients away from the soil and away from your plants. So this was my advice from someone that does compost. They said that you need to have an STA certification with the compost, and that the homeowner should ask, what is the pH? What is the carbon nitrogen ratio on that compost before you buy it? Know those things. What is the pH of the compost? What is the carbon nitrogen ratio of the compost? If they can't tell you that, you could always purchase a small amount and run a soil test. They're not that expensive to do a soil test. So, if there's any doubt. But yeah, and to be honest, I don't remember what the STA and STA certification stands for, so I'll have to look that up.
I pull it out, but it's such a small font. Seal of Testing Assurance program. It's a U.S. Composting Council.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think if a company shows that they have that type of certification, that means they're going above and beyond to ensure that they have a good product.
Yeah. Just like you said earlier, composting is a whole different class. We probably can schedule another webinar just for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I like to do home composting as well, but I can never get it quite as rich with as much organic matter as the professional composters can. So.
Oh, that reminds me, I just do a shameless plug here, because in October, yes, it's October 14th, it's a Saturday, we'll do the Water Wednesday workshop just in Lake County Discovery Garden, where you can also see Brooke's the plots, the turf plots. And also during this workshop, we have a station just about home composting. So like how homeowners how you can produce your own composting material. We haven't posted the event yet. Just follow me on my Facebook. Once the event is finalized, you can register online.
And it's funny because I started doing home composting, Elin, and I realized that I didn't have enough green, when I would chop vegetables up and make my dinner and whatnot, I didn't have enough green like toppings left over to put enough nitrogen in. And it actually in a way made me start eating healthier, so that I would have more celery pieces and more other types of vegetable pieces that I could input into my compost pile when I was done chopping things up and prepping things. So it's funny how it made me have healthier soil and be a little bit healthier in my
it's all a cycle. Yeah
I
like it. All right, we have another question here. It's about the Bahia grass. What species of Bahia grass is recommended?
Oh, you would ask me that. I can't remember I should know this. I can't remember the exact species name, but I believe we used Argentine. I get the two mixed up sometimes. Argentine is more for home lawns, because I think it's a little bit shorter, more compact. And then Pensacola is more for like highways and areas that are, I would say, utility areas that probably aren't mown as frequently. So we used Argentine Bahia grass. I should know the scientific name of the Bahia grass. It's something Pascal on my no, don't even quote me on that. But Argentine Bahia grass is what.
And the next is a comment, but I will ask Brooke, you read that, because Maryland gave some native hibiscus species, gave some name.
Oh, good.
I know I will say it wrong, so I will let you say it.
Right. Oh, okay. Wendy just asked too. Yeah, and I'm not sure. Grandiflorus is a hibiscus that Marilyn is saying are native to Florida. Militaris and Moshutos. I have no idea if I'm saying that last one correctly, but anyhow, so Marilyn, type those into the question and answer. Let's see, what should the pH be in the carbon nitrogen mix? Okay, those are good questions, Wendy. Your pH on compost is typically a little bit higher than, say, what is ideal for plant growth. And that so you don't want a compost to be pushing 8. You don't want it in the high 7s, and you don't really want it in the 8 range. That's getting a little too high for good plant growth. And carbon nitrogen ratio, you want it to be less than 20. So if it is greater than 20, it has too much carbon, and the microorganisms in the soil will start pulling away nitrogen from the soil and will pull, therefore it won't be available to your plant. So you want a 20 or less carbon nitrogen ratio. That's kind of how they refer to it.
Super. I have one more question, if
Sure.
I can ask, while giving our attendees some time to type in more questions. I'm just very curious about the project you did at Sunbridge. You said it's the developers reach out to you. It's like, hey, let's try it. I'm just very curious. It's like the motivation behind the developers. Like, what motivated the developers to do a community like that?
Oh, sure. So, I think it was part of their marketing, and they wanted to incorporate the wild area around, or some of the forested area around. Also, I want to be clear too, the developer contacted UF, so they contacted our program for resource efficient communities. So with UF, and I think one of the big reasons was to save water. And quite honestly, they were not getting permitted, I think, for the amount of water that they wanted to build the homes. And so it's like, hey, can we reduce landscape irrigation? So that's part of the reasoning there. So
yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's part of the motivation. But I think it also fits into their vision for the whole development to begin with as well. Yeah.
I would say still quite proactive.
If you look at their educational materials and their marketing materials, they all are, there's a lot of gardening involved, and there's a lot of hiking out in nature. And, they're really trying to draw the folks that are interested in these types of things.
That's great. It's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I have to say, I did not give probably a good enough plug to all of the partners that have been involved. So just going back for a minute, let me just see if, Yulin, if you mind if I pull up my first slide again.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I can just show everyone. This is why I am involved, because I find that I just really wanted to work with all these incredible partners. So the partners that we have is the School of Forest, Fisheries, and Geomatic Sciences with UF. We have also the School of Natural Resources and Environments with UF IFAS Extension through my involvement. And then we have UCF, which is their Department of Biology. We have Sunbridge, which is the development. Cherry Lake Tree Farm, which has been a fabulous partner. They're the ones that are really helping to maintain these plots and install them. Life Soils, which was our compost provider. The Nature Conservancy, which helped fund some of these projects. And so you really have, I'm probably missing some partners, and I apologize to any that I might be missing, because there were so many people involved. This project encouraged me to go for my PhD, because I said, I want to be part of this project. This is really cool. And it is a beautiful partnership with industry, with developers, with extension, with 2 different universities. I just had to be a part of it. So anyhow, so the partnerships is what pulled me in.
It's definitely a cool collaboration project.
Right.
We have one more question here from Wendy, ask about composting. Have you heard of Bokashi compost supplement for home composting?
No, that sounds interesting. I don't know what that is.
So I think, I don't know if I say it right. It's a Japanese fermented material. Wendy, if you can put a little bit, if you can elaborate your question. Yeah, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, I'm not aware. That's interesting. I'll see if I can find some information on it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let
you have a
me,
lot of knowledgeable folks on this.
yeah, that's great.
It is. So where we get how we get ideas too.
Let me end the poll for now. So we appreciate everyone taking the poll. Let me check our Facebook one more time, see if we have any questions. I think you addressed all the questions for now. Oh, wait a minute. I see Q&A. It's from Wendy. So it's the bokashi. I hope I'm saying it right. It is fermenting the product and you keep it in a pail with drainage for composting tea.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure, Wendy. You just taught me something new.
So give Brooke some work to do.
Mhm.
Probably Brooke can never finish her research project.
No, it's all good stuff. This is where you get good ideas.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I really appreciate your time, Brooke. Thank you so much for this informative presentation. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar and for all the good information through Q&A. Thank you so much, and we will see you at our next Water Wednesday. Bye.
Bye, everyone.